My name is Morgan Flom, CEO at Pivot Analysis, and today I'm going to go through some of the top level analysis tools for doing a season review. And we just finished putting together a pretty useful Excel file with all of the teams, men's and women's D1, and their relative percentiles. And that will be available after this brief or during. So I'll be using that as well as a good reference point to see how teams stacked up in various metrics, as well as a useful rubric for when you're using the analysis application, how you can see what relative percentile a number is and be able to easily compare it to the season-long data. So I'll just go through a handful of slides. So most of these documents are available on the cheat sheets page. It's been sent out a couple of times in some of our marketing emails. So these will be there, and the Excel files, if they're not currently there, will be up on this site in a little bit. And so this will be the primary external documents that we'll be using to go through some of the workflows. And then obviously the app itself. If you don't already have access, please reach out to us and we can put together a free trial for you. So that's really the analysis part of this. The other documents are useful for framing the metrics and framing the data, but the web app is where the heavy lifting is done. So just to briefly go through some of the documents. So for each division, men's and women's, we have a season review. So what we did with this document was analyze every metric starting at winning percentage and moving down through percent of shots from mid-range, and identified how they correlated with winning or with net rating, with offensive efficiency. So trying to make it pretty straightforward for, okay, how do I prioritize winning? How do I prioritize rebounding? How do I prioritize, getting to the foul line? What are some of these things that are usually captured on the analytical side? And we can easily see how they translate to winning games or translate to, defensive efficiency, really whatever the goal is. We put together a way to easily identify the underlying metrics and then how those are generated. So a lot of our work is done with 4 factors. So I don't know if you're familiar with these. They're found by Dean Oliver maybe 20 years ago now. So 4 metrics that essentially capture all end states of a possession. So effective field goal percentage is your ability to make that shot, with including the ability to make a 3. So field goal percentage with that 3 weighted in. Offensive rebound rate is percentage of misses that are rebounded. Free throw rate is free throws made divided by field goal attempts. So ability to get to the line and the ability to make that shot. And then turnover rate is the percentage of possessions that end in a turnover. So capturing those for offense and defense enable you to understand how efficient of a shot profile you have, how often you turn it over, how often you get that rebound, and how often you get the line. So really capturing at the end state level, at least, how you perform on a possession by possession basis. And then these together really encapsulate offensive and defensive efficiency, because ultimately, whether it's from efficient shot making or getting a ton of rebounds, increasing that points per shot or points per possession and decreasing the opponents is the ultimate goal of a lot of the analytics that we're putting together. So this document is a useful framing document for knowing how things could be prioritized based on last year's data. The specific numbers are important, but it's usually good to reference them in buckets. So there's a 10% gap between at the rim percentage and 3-point percentage in this. So they're probably, like, maybe one is a little more important, but essentially it's more important that these three are viewed as tier 1, and then these other ones viewed as tier 2. So it's more trying to bucket these things and say, okay, your ability to make that mid-range shot is not as important as rim and three, period. So those two, they're closer, and there's maybe a little bit of difference, but we're trying to bucket these things to make it easier to understand the larger differences between, whether assist percentage really drives effective shot making or not. So these exist for men's and women's for Division I, and are useful for kind of picking the stats that maybe that matter or that you want to focus on. So today I'll be spending more time on percentiles and the cheat sheets. So the cheat sheet was an initial document that we put together just as an easy reference point for viewing a number in a vacuum and seeing how good it was relative to your peers. So the basic breakdown of 90th percentile to 10th percentile, we have that for every stat, offense and defense. And so it's useful for quickly saying, okay, we had a +5 net rating. What is that? Okay, maybe it's like 70th percentile based on this. But what's something that I just finished up is the breakdown of all teams in Division I. And so this will be a more detailed way to drill in, and then using whatever top level stats like net rating or offensive rating, seeing how teams stacked up, but also being able to drill into any of the 4 factors, offensive or defensive, and then any of the specific shot types. So this is a document that for not only an individual season, like seeing how you compare to your opponents, but also maybe for scheduling purposes or for conference scouting. So these are a couple of topics that we'll be doing in the future. This can be something where you can see not only specifically how a team performed, but also in the aggregate, what strengths and weaknesses a certain conference may have based on these metrics. So AAC tended to have stronger defensive EFG. So there's ways to pull some of this out, and that's reflected in the offensive side as well, obviously, because they tend to, they play each other a lot, and so there's going to be some mirroring here. But it's a clean way of starting to go in and say, okay, I know that I have a good offense. How does that matter compared to the teams that I play every year, or the teams that only play twice from the conference side? Something that we've added into this document as well. So you'll see next to every stat is the percentile. So this is raw percentile. So this number, a net free throw rate of 3.13, is in the 70.7th percentile from all Division I teams. We also have the ability to capture the opponent adjusted number. So we can say, okay, we know that Cincinnati had a 50% EFG, which is in the 61st percentile overall. However, they played against really tough defenses, as we kind of have seen from over here. So the reality is that their opponent adjusted EFG would be in the 85th percentile. And so you're able to see on a raw level where a number stands, as well as, okay, we know that they played harder defenses. The reality is that they would have been a more efficient offense, all things being equal, because that scenario, especially in the NCAA, you have a wide range. And so being able to say, okay, on the raw basis, maybe purely looking at a conference level, this number is useful, but I know that as we transition to non-conference play, getting that opponent adjusted metric is super important, because then you can see, okay, they had a really bad EFG more or less, but they also played super tough competition, and so that's being reflected a lot in the numbers that they have. So that's a basic rundown of how to read this document. All of these metrics will be ones that you find in the application, and I'll be going through that, obviously. And so it's just another way to find a baseline for a team, understand what that baseline meant relative to its peers, and then start to drill in from there. So we have all the shooting location stuff in here. So we grab shooting location in terms of buckets at the rim, at or around the rim, not at or around the rim, but from 2 and then from 3. And so you'll have percentages and proportions in all those locations. So obviously proportion from mid-range, we view lower numbers here as better, lower number of shots per field goal attempt. So we able to see the teams that reduce their number of shots from mid-range. And then some assist information, so assist turnover ratio, assist percentage. So a really useful way to look at single team, and also drill into some of the conference data. So transitioning from that to the tool. So there's a couple of methods that I like to do, and I'll be walking through some of those. So we can start maybe at a single team and drill in and try to uncover some of the driving factors for positive, negative performance, and then get below the surface level a little bit and see what was causing these. So I was looking at some of the Alabama data and trying to just understand what was driving positive, negative performance for them. So one of the most useful tools in the beginning for analysis, and this has been really well received from our coaches, is the OnOff tool. So the spreadsheet or any of these your standard team level stats will give you a good idea overall on how your team performs. But we want to drill into how players are affecting that performance on the court. That's really where Pivot can start to shine. And so the on-off metrics provide a clear example of how we can track each player's production or performance on the floor, and then start to make some decisions about who is actually driving offensive and defensive performance. So the on-off tables look at obviously every possession that this player is on the floor. What was the offensive and defensive rating? So points per possession times 100. What's that net? And then we're comparing it to every possession when they were off the floor. So it's important when we're doing these types of data sets that the sample size is useful. So, I mean, obviously Kira Lewis is very good, but in general, 170 possessions is not a large enough sample to do some type of analysis on. So for the most part, focusing on the on is going to be a little bit more productive in terms of understanding what the future may hold, or what numbers are actually able to sustain. So you do have the ability, especially for like a rotation player. So obviously James Bolden played 1,100 or 1,200 possessions on and off. So these numbers are fairly large on both ends. And so we can make some analysis on, okay, he generally had a negative offensive and defensive impact. So that is more useful in terms of analyzing the on-off than Kira Lewis or probably John Petty, because these possession counts are pretty low. But we really want to focus on the on-court metrics here. So looking in at who is driving the best offensive production and the best defensive production, Kira had a 114 offensive rating, Shackelford 116, and then Jones was at a 102 defensive rating. So this gives us an idea on when these people are on the floor, who's driving the performance here. So we know that Alabama was 111 and 107 season long. So that 114 when Kira Lewis is on the floor, Auburn has that about, so it's a 93rd percentile. So that's an elite offense. And then the 102 with Jones was the 70th percentile. So we have an idea now on what these numbers actually mean in a broader context, and we can start to drill in a little bit on how they affected the team performance. So the lineup explorer is where we would go to do any of the further analysis. So OnOff can provide the indicator. So in this case, let's start with Herbert Jones. The defense performed really well when he was on the floor. And now we want to know why, because a defensive rating on its own is useful, but unless we understand the underlying metrics, then it's not as actionable. So drilling into this, we can start to see where his impact is specifically. So overall, Alabama was a net negative in free throw rate, TOV, ORR, and +4 in EFG. But when he's on the floor, the EFG jumped up to 6, and they're positive in all the other 4 factors. And so you see it's about a 2% swing on offense and defense in each of the 4 factors. So there's these marginal impacts that he's having. And so obviously when he's off the floor, whoever is taking those minutes is maybe the shot profile stays mostly the same, but the rebounding production goes down, the ability to draw fouls goes down, the foul committing goes up, turnovers go up, and then committing turnovers goes up and forcing turnovers goes down. So start to pull out, okay, what's his impact? It's not as much on the efficient shot profile, it's a lot more on the other 3-4 factors. So drilling into really these metrics and understanding what a certain player's impact is useful for starting to pull out where they can start to contribute and maybe move into a bigger role. So the shooting profile that I mentioned before was breaking down every shot by this bucket. So this is a good way to understand offensive strategy more or less. I mean, there's obviously a lot more nuance to it, but taking shots at the rim, taking shots not at the rim, taking shots from 3 provides a really good framework for understanding how efficient an offense is and how efficient they are in these locations. And so in this case, when he's on the floor, the offense really isn't impacted at all. 1.04 is overall, and it's same with him on the floor, but the defense is when he starts to make an impact. So drilling into what's happening there. So a lot of it is driven by some change in terms of percentage of shots and field goal percentage at the rim. So overall, Alabama allowed 53% field goal percentage for shots at the rim, and 49% of opponent shots were taken at the rim. And then when Herbert Jones is on the floor, that number goes down to 48 and 46. And so those are not huge swings, but because it's the most efficient shot, the shot at the rim, being able to reduce that efficiency and reduce the proportion of shots ends up having an exponential effect in terms of his impact. So he's able to have a decent defensive impact on the shot profile just by the fact that when he's on the floor, I mean, maybe he's not the sole reason for it, but he's definitely a factor in creating a scenario where opponents are getting to the rim less often, and when they do get to the rim, they're making it less often. So the on-off is one place that we use as a start point. The other place that I like to use is the 2-player combinations. So in this view, we're pre-calculating every possession played by 2 players and showing their numbers by offense defensive net rating, and then also by synergy. So our synergy score is nothing to do with the other company synergy. It's our way of showing how 2 players positively or negatively affect each other. Because in a vacuum, every player has their individual on-court ratings, and if all things were equal, then when they play together, their 2-player net rating would be the average of their single-player net ratings. But that's not the case, obviously, because there's always positive, negative synergies between players. And so we're trying to capture that. And for the most part, it'll be smaller numbers, 1, 2, 3, which is probably noise. But once you get over 5, so this is essentially 6.12 points per 100 possessions are added when these two players play together relative to what you would expect. And so it starts to open up, okay, there is something driving this. I mean, obviously we know that Jones happens to be the best defensive player and Carlos is the best offensive player. So it's pretty clear what's driving some of this impact. But we can also use the same approach to analyzing negative synergy combinations. So why, when Javian Davis and John Petty play together, the team is a negative net rating and the synergy is an even larger negative. So something is happening when these two players are on the floor. And just looking at the net rating is not sufficient. We probably wanted to dive in and understand a little bit more about what's actually happening on the floor. And so once again, the lineup explorer is going to be your friend in this, because it's just a really easy way of saying, okay, I want to drill in and analyze this combination, and I want to know what's happening to the team when these two players are on the floor. And so in this case, fairly similar EFG numbers, but you're seeing a huge drop in rebounding. And so having a negative 8% net on rebounding is probably like 5th percentile. So not very good. Let me pull that up. Yeah, well, probably like 1st percentile, 0. So very, very bad. So it's pretty clear what's happening in this scenario. And they're also a negative differential on turnovers. So basically, even though they're still taking more efficient shots than their opponents, the opponents are getting a lot more attempts per 100 possessions in this scenario, because they're out rebounding them and they're winning the turnover battle, the opponents are. And so being at that kind of deficit in terms of raw field goal attempts makes, so this combination is really bad on both ends, but especially bad on the defensive end with this 111 defensive rating. And then in this tool, not only can we go into the player combos, but we wanted to drill in and say, okay, I know that, we performed really well overall, but how does this translate to the second half? What is their performance change significantly between the first and the second half? So we're able to do all that because we're capturing every lineup, every shift throughout the game and adding in metadata with what period it's in, when it is specifically in that period, is it starters, is it home, away, et cetera. And so being able to drill in here and say, okay, the reality is that the first half was definitely more productive for Alabama. And then we could take this a step further and start to drill in and say, okay, what actually is happening here? Why does the defense drop off in the second half? Is it something to do with where the shots are being taken? Is the team getting tired and allowing more shots at the rim? Whatever. Like there could be any number of factors, but identifying these top level indicators, so starting with net rating or offensive defensive rating, and then drilling in and starting to uncover, okay, it's a rebounding problem, it's a turnover problem, it's that we're not getting to the rim. So being able to quickly ID those drops or those gains is where you can start to understand, okay, this is what's happening in the scenario, and then making some of those changes on the strategy side can be where you can start to implement some of the data that you found in our tools. If you want to reach out, you can either sign up on our site or shoot us an email. The contact@pivotanalysis.com, I think is on the site is a good point of contact. And we'd be happy to set anybody up with an account, and we can do more catered walkthrough based on your team. So being able to kind of spend 30 minutes or 45 minutes going through some of your data and hopefully uncover some valuable insights. All right, well, thank you for your time and hope everyone has a good weekend.